Yes, and it's
If you'd like me to drop the hammer, I can.
Yes,
Is that
I
what you're
would,
saying?
because I like to get started on time.
On behalf of Tony, who's now the chair, we'll start this workshop.
We were talking business
Sorry.
though.
Yes,
We can
well,
be.
if it's not on the agenda, it's not business.
We've got sunshine laws against that.
We do have sunshine laws against that.
Don't worry,
Right
she
on
made me
time.
push the hammer fast. I would have given you an extra minute.
Not me.
You have your running shoes on, so I would have expected more from you.
I was doing a chaperone at Tampa for the school, and I left at 1 o'clock, and there was an accident on I-4, and I just got home.
I was gonna say, you're lucky to be here. One accident on I-4 can take you 3
It
hours.
took me 4 hours to get here from Tampa to here.
That's crazy.
Yep, been there, done that. They don't give out T-shirts, but, you know.
Or medals.
So, we've called it to order, and I'll give you the
Thank you very
Lectern.
much.
microphone, whatever you wanna call the thing.
Okay, so I'm super excited tonight because the last time we met was on August 9th, so I missed you all in September. I cried myself to sleep. But I am really excited tonight because we are going to finalize the stuff that we were talking about in August. If you can remember that far back, we were going over the certificate of appropriateness, the processes, the submittal requirements, and also the major and minor review chart. So we got partway through the major and minor review chart, so I want to go ahead and start with that. So you have some printouts in front of you. There is one that has columns that say ordinary maintenance, staff, and board. That is the one that the city is currently using. So that's the existing major and minor review chart. And like I said, at our last meeting, we did get partway through that. I've since taken the notes that I took from that meeting. I compiled them into what is proposed to be the new major and minor review chart, which is the one that is much more simplified. And it just says action, minor review staff, or major review HPB. So I wanted you to have the existing one so you can reference back to it, and then we can go through this new one that I'm proposing and see if you all want me to tweak this anymore. The purpose of our board meeting tonight, we don't have any actual applications for you to review. The sole purpose of the meeting tonight is to get through this. That way, at your meeting, you can actually vote on the work that we did during this work session, so we can move forward with it, okay? So going through this, we've got action, minor review, and major review. So we did have a pretty good discussion at the last meeting about accessory structures, and I know that we all pretty much feel that the accessory structure allotment was a little bit big, but I've met with staff and we've discussed this, and it is in the ordinance elsewhere, so we have to be careful about what we change in here without actually taking action on changing the ordinance. So what I've got here is for this to be a minor review on these accessory structures, and when I say accessory structures, essentially we're talking about sheds. At the 800 square feet and in the rear yard, or 50% of the total air-conditioned floor area of the existing primary building. That little row got cut off. So if somebody's primary building is like 900 square feet, then this could allow staff to approve up to 450 square feet, which seems high for staff approval. So I want to call your attention to this bottom statement here, which is applicable to all items. And it says that, I'm going to read the whole thing. The omission of an action shall not mean the project is exempt from review. Review for omitted actions shall be at the discretion of the Community Development Department. Staff may require any action to undergo a higher level of review at their discretion. So if staff is looking at a application for a shed at, as an example that I just used, 450 square feet, and it's really not in character with the main building and all of that, that is staff's discretion. They can send it back to you all. So of course, if it was something that was being proposed as an actual living unit, that would be new construction. That would have to go before the board, but this is just for those accessory buildings like sheds. So it deviates a little bit from what we talked about at the last meeting, but again, the reason why I left it in here like this is because we can change procedures right now, but we can't change actually something that's in the code. That would have to come when we're doing our code change, which we plan to do when we are doing the design guidelines. So I see Chair Clark.
Just a question in regards to the, worrying about the accessory structure. If it's in the rear yard, it's not a front facade element, it's not something that's necessarily visible. So the question is are we pushing and overreaching and making things more difficult and making people go through a higher level of submittals in order to achieve something that is not necessarily a permanent structure?
So right here, that we do have it listed under minor review, so it would be a staff level approval. And it would only go before the board if staff sees something that they really think that the board's not gonna be comfortable with.
Maybe you started talking about 450 square feet, not the 800. That's why I was trying to understand that.
I was just saying, as an example, it says less than 800 square feet and in the rear yard or 50% of the total air-conditioned floor area of the, basically of the actual home that's on the property. So if you have a home there that's 900 square feet, staff would be able to approve something up to 450 square feet.
But if it's in the rear and not necessarily visible, the question is does that square footage really come into play? It's more issue of visibility, correct? Not all structures and elements put into the rear yard are necessarily visible. Should the rear yard be enclosed, like many are, with a 6-foot opaque fence, you don't have any visibility to it, and the square footage really isn't applicable. So that's, there's a lot of variability that you need to take into account. I really would hate to have us reviewing a whole bunch of accessory structures that just happen to be slightly over the 50% of the air-conditioned space and aren't necessarily impacting the district.
Yeah, sure. We'll go ahead and have Abe address that one.
Yeah, that's fine.
Abraham Fogel. So we do review a lot of accessory structures. Our zoning, it's a zoning requirement of the 800 square feet or 50% of the AC area. Otherwise, they have to go to BOA for a variance. Part of those requirements also include that the architectural design and exterior materials are consistent with the main structure. So we're already getting that additional documentation. So I think we're talking about.
I guess I'm just trying to determine why it would, so you're saying that if it goes over the 50%, it has to go to the Board of Adjustment anyway?
Correct.
So now they've got to go through 2 boards to get it done?
Well, I guess it would depend on the situation. So we might be dealing with a masonry home and they want to do a metal building and they do not want to pursue any finish that would bring consistency, then that's an incompatible design. Then they might have to come to you guys. But we're essentially saying if they're meeting all of their zoning and it's a compatible design, they would not have to come to you.
Yeah, I'm just worried about putting additional onus on applicants. And if that were to trigger and they had to go through 2 different boards just to get it done, that's an awful lot of work for a shed.
Yeah. We have worked with folks. They reduce their sheds all the time to comply with the zoning, and they've found different solutions to, add exterior finishes. So it's more for those folks that, they might find they have some extenuating circumstance to not meet it.
And right now, it is listed as a minor review item. So we are proposing it fully as a minor review item, just with that little statement at the bottom, that if staff determines that this is something, as an example, if you sit here tonight and say, you know what, we're good with that, but we don't really want to see 700 square foot metal buildings in people's backyards, then we know, okay, if that's what they're proposing and that's what they really want, then something like that would have to come to HPB, which would be likely a recommendation of denial. Staff would work with the applicant to let them know what HPB is looking for. But right now, we are proposing this just as a minor review.
I'm just saying, so that, I guess if we push it any further, then we're going to have to also address it in our design standards. And that means addressing accessory structures in our design standards as well.
which we will be, yeah.
And I'm assuming that you've got residential design standards that are addressing this, you know, on the other aspect as far as, you know, on a non-historic level?
All accessory structures above 200 square feet, we are reviewing their appearance to be consistent with the new structure.
Okay. Well, I was just saying, I didn't know, I wasn't familiar with that being in the code as far as a requirement, because there's no residential design standards currently, so.
We did in May and pass an ordinance for, it's mostly applying to the new subdivisions and communities, but we did establish residential architecture.
Okay.
Those were actually approved? Abe, okay. I know I've seen them, I just didn't know that they actually finalized that
The
process.
city will need to do a little bit better job of pushing that out to the professionals, because I can tell you, our office is not aware of that. I mean, other than from the new subdivision standpoint, but if you're talking about beyond the subdivisions, then,
No, yeah, that wouldn't impact just these individual
yeah.
residential lots.
Okay.
Yeah, my big concern is the fact, why do you need something that big in your backyard when you're in a community? So I'm fine with the regulations, you know, because I think that it will, I've seen, living in the city, abuse with metal sheds because they want to, you know, maybe run a business or whatever. So I'm fine with it. I think it might be a little more work for the homeowner, but I think it'll also, in the long run, be a good thing.
Any other comments?
Well, yeah, my only concern is if people are coming in currently and buying outside of the district, or even in the district, and they don't know that they're in a historic district, and they purchase, and then all of a sudden they think they have to jump through all these hoops. I kind of agree a little bit with Richard. You know, we're going to push it to the point where some of that background noise that we're getting, like through people running to city council members, then all of a sudden you have a whole issue with our whole process. So I think we do need to think it through and make sure that all the wonderful things we want and think that should be in place is also going to be palatable to both the community and our city council members.
And that's the idea of us getting together tonight and doing this is, and you'll see when we look at the application form, is making the application form user-friendly, more user-friendly, making sure that people know where to get the information, making sure, we could just jump over for a second. If you take the existing application form, which is the one that doesn't have like the band at the bottom, you take a look at that and you just kind of flip through those pages there. You know, the second page that you get to is there's just all this language, ordinance language. And then it just goes on and on.
And then everybody's head explodes.
Everybody's head explodes, right. If you take the proposed one, which is the one that has the band on the bottom, you can see we've tried to do it a little bit more in a user-friendly way, where it has a lot of information, but it's not that head-exploding information, it's more of a checklist. So, Abe and I talked about this, if it's an applicant who's coming to City Hall, and as an example, they want to do replacement windows and doors, that gives an opportunity to staff just to take a pen and say, this is the only section you have to concern yourself with. So it helps them to zero in on the information, but as well gives them a checklist of items that they have to submit. Because right now, if you look at the present C of A, right now what's happening is they just know that they have to submit an application. Mm-hmm. So then they submit an application, and we have to go back to them and say, well, now we need this. And so there's this back and forth that we're trying to head off on the front end where, okay, here's the application. These are all the things that you need to submit for the application. So it cuts down on that back and forth and tries to streamline it a little bit.
Well, I really think that that's necessary. We have the same discussion in the EDAC, in the Economic Development Advisory Council, and we just went through process with that, just like businesses or anything else that are coming to City Hall, and how we can make it more simple and easy and flow through, and that they know that there's, you know, in that case, a person, a liaison to help them through the process, because what happens is we think we're doing that internally, but if they don't know it externally, the same problem happens, because then they're just running around like a chicken because they're like, I don't know which direction to go, and they don't know there's someone to reach out to. And so we do have to do a better job of the outreach, I think, and that solves a lot of our problems. And then we don't have all this stuff happening.
So let me give you the overview. So let's step back a little bit. So these forms that I'm having you look at tonight and vote on during your regular meeting, ultimately what we want to do is have this on the website. So there'll be the historic preservation page on the website, and as we build our library of documents, people can just always know that if it's dealing with anything in the historic district, they could go to that section, click on it, and get all of the information that they need. So you all have had a historic preservation board for several years now, but as you know, you all haven't been very active. So even with certificate of appropriateness that the board should be reviewing, there were whole months and months where meetings would get canceled, and you all were only required to have 4 meetings a year. So you've had...
Oh, some of us are very aware.
Yeah. So you've had historic, district regulations and all of that, but you've not been so active. So now that you're waking that up and making movement on it, no matter what, there are going to be people who complain because it's doing something different and it's something unfamiliar to people, so you're always going to have the people who complain. What we want to do is be able to say, if somebody does complain, as an example, to the city manager or the council member, we can say, this is what we've done to improve it. If we have additional recommendations to improve it further, we'd be happy to. But we can actually show what information we now have out there and the level of support we're trying to provide. Where I think if you do a comparison of the existing certificate of appropriateness and this one, you can see that they're very, very different, as well as the review chart that we started with. If you look at the existing one, it's got all of these columns. It's talking about contributing and non-contributing and terms that, your applicants are not really going to understand and quite frankly don't really affect them. As we've talked about before, contributing and non-contributing really is important when you get to National Register designation. But at the local level, if you're in the district, you're in the district. So highlighting that distinction only serves to make people think, oh, I'm non-contributing, so I don't have to go through any of these processes, which is not true. So it sets this kind of confusion up from the beginning. That's why, when possible, I try to actually minimize that reference to contributing and non-contributing because it tends to be so confusing to people. So back to the 2 review charts. If you could see, this one goes on 2 pages. It's got many different columns. This, we're keeping it to 1 page, and it's pretty straightforward. It's saying, these are minor reviews, staff is going to be able to approve it. These are major reviews, that's when you're going to have to go before the board. And at the top of the application form, also the new one, we've got the little box in the corner that could just be checked. Is it a minor review? Is it a major review? Is it commercial, residential? So right up front, they'll know what fee they're paying. So, we've really poured over this and tried to do as many tweaks as we can to make it an easier and more streamlined process. But that's the overview. And to give you a little bit more of that overview, I can't bring this to the board yet because it's something that I haven't vetted internally. But what the next step is, we'll look at this together tonight. You all will vote on it. Once I have the direction from the board, then I will meet internally with staff. So the department director, Abe, whoever else needs to be involved, people from building, like to have code enforcement at that meeting. We're going to talk about this and what we can do to help kind of staff on the inside. So it's 2-step. It's looking to help the applicant understand what we're doing, but also to streamline things for staff. And so as an example, a lot of different historic communities you go to, if there's an application that's going before the Historic Preservation Board, there'll usually be a posting on the site that notices people. So I'll pick on Sanford. You know how much I love Sanford. But in Sanford, what they do is they print an 11x17 that has information. It says COA, public meeting, the date, the time, what the property owner is requesting, and then that gets put in the window 10 days in advance of the meeting. So any of your neighbors, oh, what's going on there? Oh, okay, I could go to that meeting, or I could go online and see what they're proposing, or I could contact staff and see what they're proposing. Then also, once a COA is approved, whether it's a major review or a minor review, a lot of municipalities will have a sheet, an approval sheet, that the application form gets attached to that has all the information too. So that will be the approved COA, and it says COA real big, and it gets put in the window while the work is going on. Why that's helpful is as activity starts becoming, as it becomes more active as far as what's being done on properties in the district, it's much better for staff, building department, for example, if they're driving down the road and they see that somebody is ripping windows out of a building or ripping a roof off a building, they could go right up and say, I don't see your COA posted, I'm doing a stop work order, you have to produce your COA. So, but if they have approval to do that, that would already be posted in the window. So again, it's taking steps out of that process. They're not having to go back to the office and pull it up and do the research. It's boom, right there in the window. So that's giving you a bigger overview of what I'm looking for. That part of it I can't bring to you yet because, again, that's internal processes. So once we get that ironed out and I get the support and, we tweak whatever we have to and we roll that out, I could bring that back to you as an information item. But I really wanted to take this first and have that lead the conversation that, this is what the board met on, this is what we're looking at, and then hopefully that will inform that internal process. But I don't know if you've ever been, historic places where you've seen that, where they have the COA request in the window, or they have the COA approval in the window, or in some municipalities, they'll put it on a sign that they place in the ground outside the building. I don't really like that option because there's a cost involved in it. Something like that could be exposed to the elements. It could get damaged in the time that you're waiting for the meeting to happen, or if the work is going on the site for 6 months, what's going to happen to the sign during that time? So I like the approach of just the 11 by 17 sitting in the window, or the approval sitting in the window. But that gives you kind of the big picture of what I'm trying to achieve here. Does that all make sense? Or did I talk too much? Okay, so having said that, I would like to switch gears back to that major and minor review chart. So the first one we did was accessory structures. The next one I have is additions. On that one, I do think any addition on any building in the district should require Historic Preservation Board review. So that would be one I'd be looking for the board's direction on that, if you're in agreement with that. Should I keep going? If you're in agreement, I'll hear silence and I'll keep going. If you object, stop me, okay? Okay, so we seem to be in agreement with that. Removal of historic features, I think that's pretty important if somebody wants to, remove brackets or any kind of architectural feature that's original. I don't think that should be taken lightly. I think that should go before the board. So I have a check mark for the board for major review. As well, the addition of architectural features, I think, should go before the board. Now, I could change this one slightly. So because I thought about this after, if they have an architectural feature that is missing from the building, that they have photographic evidence was original to the building, I think staff should be able to sign off on that. So I would change that wording a little bit. Addition of architectural features not supported by, pictorial evidence or something like that. So if it's just a feature that they want to add, I see that a lot where in historic communities, people like to add those little scrolly things at the top of their porches because Lowe's and Home Depot sell them. They're not original to your building. They're a creation of like 2000. So they don't really belong. So if that's something that somebody submits to staff and they're really adamant about wanting to do it, we can't tell them no because we don't have design guidelines that strictly say no. So that would be something that I would say go to the board. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Awnings. So for awnings, I have structural awnings integrated into the architecture of the building. I think that should go before the Historic Preservation Board. That is in contrast to awnings that are affixed to the facade, able to be removed without affecting the form and integrity of the building. So the distinction between those two is basically, a lot of times in the commercial areas, you'll see where, as an example of number 2, property owners will want to do like a fabric canopy, a fabric awning. That should be a staff level approval, in my opinion. It gives them an opportunity to put their business signage on there. Usually they're pretty attractive. It's not changing your architectural design or style in any way. So I have that listed as a minor review. But if it's a structural awning that they actually want to build an awning that ties in structurally to the building, that kind of has bearing on the building from an architectural design perspective, but also a structure perspective, I feel like that should go before HPB.
If they're doing that, they'd have to do it into the right-of-way, which is a whole other level as well. When you're talking about an actual attached structure to the facade, at least within the central business district, most of the buildings are that's where you're going to run into it. Just like what we have in half a dozen scenarios right now in the downtown area.
So do you agree with this?
I think if it's structural, then yeah, it needs to be a full board review.
Okay. Okay, so the next thing I have is demolitions. On the old one, it had demolitions of non-historic additions up to 10% for staff. I think if somebody wants to remove an addition that was not historic and they're bringing the building back to more original appearance and they're not affecting the original building, that staff should be able to approve that. So I would like to see that one become a minor review because it's something we really want to encourage. If somebody says I have this awful addition, on my north elevation that should never have been there, that impacts my architectural style, I want to remove it, it's not original, we should bless that all day long. So I have that as a minor
Will
review.
staff be then giving impact or input in regards to the repairs to the facade element that the attachment was done to then? Because that's obviously an element that needs to be considered. If you're tearing off something that's not historic, wherever it attached, you have to determine, is the historic, structure still there? Or was it removed when the attachment was done and now you have repairs, which then would trigger it to us for...
So we can clarify that somehow to state basically non-historic additions if the original exterior wall is still intact. Would that work?
Yeah, that's why I just want people to be aware that, there's that element, the connection element, which, I think later on you were talking about replacement in the same materials.
Yeah.
So, if they, it kind of follows down into that, but it could trigger if it's going to suitable materials, then all of a sudden now it's not just removing the non-historic element, it's going back to repair of that. So it would come to us anyway, so 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
But I think having clarification to that
Yeah.
sentence would be helpful.
Oh.
So to say, as long as the original wall services, what exterior wall is intact.
Yeah.
Okay. All other demolitions, including all historic demolitions, I think should always come to the board.
What other would there be besides non-historic and historic? I love words, I'm just asking.
We could take that out and just put all other demolitions.
Well, I was just saying it would be historic demolition, correct? It's either historic or it's non-historic.
There could be an argument at some point in there somewhere that the board might want to weigh in as to somebody arguing whether or not something is historic.
Okay.
Somebody might argue that historic only means what was there when it was first built. I can think of one property in particular. But there are additions that may be over 50 years of age. So I could take that out if you want it.
Well, it just seemed, extra verbiage, that's all.
Do you all want me to just have all other?
I mean, who's making the determination of whether it's historic or not? Staff is, right? So if it's not historic, then it's not historic. If it's not, it would be historic. So-
Okay, I can take that, that's easy enough. Okay, so door, windows, other openings. So one, same material, style, and size as existing original. I have that being a minor review. Change in material, style, or dimension of openings, I have as going to HPB.
Okay.
I'm surprised that you all don't want further discussion on this one.
Windows.
It's almost always going to be two, because it's good luck trying to find same material, size, and style.
Well, you
You
can.
can't do that with current materials, let alone historic
You
materials.
can get everything fabricated, but, so same material, styles, and size as existing original only. So, if they have double hung wood windows and somebody comes in and says, I want to replace with vinyl, I really think if they have existing wood windows on their building, that if they want to trade those out, it really should come before the board. Because that's taking out an original feature. I mean,
Well,
and
we've
wood
had that
windows could be
before.
restored. What was that?
We've had that before.
Okay. So you're okay with how this is right now?
Yeah.
Okay, how are we doing on time? We're doing pretty good. Driveways and sidewalks, I have always as a minor review. Exterior wall finishes, removal of non-historic siding, minor review, staff. Replacement with the same as existing original materials, minor review, staff. Replacement with acceptable, suitable materials, I have as board review, because I think that the board really needs to determine what is an acceptable replacement material.
Well, and unless we have a reference document that actually explains what's considered to be acceptable. I mean, ultimately, that would be the best methodology to go,
Which would be in your design guidelines.
which would be
that
in
we
the
don't-
design guidelines, yes.
This is just a kind of temporary measure until
Understood.
you all, yeah.
It's those design guidelines that need to get done.
Very important. Painting a currently painted surface, I have minor review. Any other change in exterior wall finish, I have as a major review. New construction, I have as a major review. I think that should always go before the board. Porches and enclosures, opening an enclosed porch, we want to see that done. That would be great. So I have that as minor review. Enclosing a porch, I have as major. Relocation, I don't think we need to start moving buildings around like chess pieces. I think that really needs a lot of consideration. I think something like that should go before HPB.
I have a question about the open and enclosed porch, with it going to minor review. If that enclosed porch, are they going to make sure they're still doing it in, respect to the architecture of that house? Will they make sure that's done?
Yeah, so maybe we need to add this statement, open and enclosed porch to original appearance. Would that cover it? Okay, we can add that. And enclosing a porch in any way should go before the board. Repair, same material as existing original. I think that should be staff. Change in material from known original. I think that should be board. Roof, same material and shape. On this one, I didn't write as existing original because I don't know if you all have seen, there was a property several months ago that when they started pulling the roof, they had the actual original wood shingles. That was beautiful. But
Really?
yeah, it got covered over the same day or the next day. But, some of this, that goes now into building code requirements, so I didn't want to say the same as original, because I think with roofs, that does get a little tough. So I have same material and shape, that change in material and or shape. We had an application like that with, on New York Avenue, the gentleman who wanted to open the cigar bar, where they wanted to change that roof shape. So I think something like that should go before HPB.
Yeah, but you have it marked as same materials and same shape being a major review, so is that really a staff level?
I'm sorry, no, that was my mistake. Same material and shape should be minor. I'll correct that.
Okay. I was just gonna say, because otherwise, After every major storm event, we could be a very busy board.
No, that was my mistake. Okay, so change of material and or shape. Okay, so we only have two more. We have signage, walls, and fences, and I have both of those being minor reviews.
Yeah.
I had something I wanted to go back to. You were talking about perhaps putting notices on windows on 11 by 17, paper or placards, and the thought occurred to me, how would people read those without trespassing on the property to get close enough to read them?
So there, on the 11 by 17, the COA is very large, as well as the website address and the contact info.
So they could read it from the street.
If, in many cases, the houses are close enough to the street that you do have visibility to read it, but if the house is set a little further back from the road, at least that important information where they could call City Hall and say, you know, I went by this house on 12th Street and I saw this sign in the window, can you tell me a little bit about it? It is large enough for
Well,
that.
if they even knew the sign that was in the window had something to do with what was being done to it, is my point. They may not know.
So the sign will have that information written on it, whether or not everyone has the ability to see that from the right of
Yeah.
way.
My preferred method is if it's posted near the property line, where people driving by as well as walking by can read it. It might cost the city a little money to put a stake out there with it on there, but every city I've lived in has required posting.
Yeah, but that's the onus of the applicant, not the city.
Well, the applicant could pay for it,
Yeah.
but the city actually did the posting where I lived.
Abe looks like he wants to weigh in on that, so.
Abe wants to go out and post.
Or city could provide the materials, the sign to the applicant, and the applicant could be required to post it.
As someone who's done a lot of sign postings, I did enjoy it. But I think in our ordinance, we do not have that required. So if potentially at some point the board would like that to be a requirement, then that would be part of the application and we would look at the costs and all that. I think what Christine was coming up with was a solution to bring attention to it without the posting and changing the code right now.
Right. My concern is if our intent is to really give notice, let's really give notice, not a pseudo notice that they may or may not see or be legally able to walk up and see. Because if it requires trespassing on property, that's not good.
My thing would be, how long's that post gonna last, though?
Well,
With
the ones.
teenagers and
Oh,
cars running them over.
No, the ones that were in the cities I lived in, they didn't bother government postings. They weren't classy enough or sexy enough for people to bother.
But my thought is, how many people would really be interested enough to check that posting out, that if you put it in the window, that would, the people that were interested, that would be sufficient?
Then that's on them.
Oh,
That is on them.
Relax, Tony.
We also have a really large right-of-way, so you could get up pretty close to windows before actually being on their property.
Yeah. Well,
I guess Christine had a great idea just in the interim, if the board decides in some point in the future to include that in the code, if you guys were interested as, just, you know, a method to bring attention to it.
and people, by the way, property owners may not want to have a sign in their window.
They may not want
At
to have a
the
sign in
minimum,
their
they're gonna have to
yard.
keep it with their
Right.
building permits,
Well, it
which have to
wouldn't
be
be in their
posted.
yard, it could be outside of their yard.
So where we are with this right now is it's not in the ordinance, so we can't require any of it. So
No.
this is a suggestion if it's something that's one of those things that I said I couldn't actually bring to the board until we have that internal discussion. So, you know, the higher ups of the city might say, we don't even want that at all. I don't know, but this is something that I'm going to bring to them as a suggestion, because it is good to put that information out there and to have people have some awareness that you are in a historic district. What that usually tends to do is neighbors start talking, oh, did you see the thing in so-and-so's window? And it just brings an awareness that there's actually activity going on and all of that. It doesn't cost anything. It's
Yeah.
just a paper that gets printed.
People will start inquiring when they see the bulldozers and the work going on and wondering what's happening in their neighborhood.
Well, that's already happening.
That'll be worked much better than any sign.
Yeah.
All right, do we want to go over the application form before we run out of time, workshop
Yeah,
times?
because we have probably another 5 minutes before we have to take our 15-minute break. Do you have any questions about this before we move on? Whoever decides to make a motion on this, if you could just
Oh.
make reference to the corrections that you directed staff to incorporate.
I thought the checklist was fantastic.
Good. Awesome. Okay, so going over to the application, if you'll just take probably a minute or two to look at the existing application and then what we have proposed. I won't speak for that time.
I don't see an email address for the applicant. Am I missing it here?
On the, yes, you're missing it. On this current one?
On
on
the
the new
old,
one.
new one.
I'll add that.
I guess in regards to the new application and that you're asking for a current use versus a proposed use, if these are just changes to the building, it's not necessarily changing the use. We're not authorizing or determining whether or not their uses are allowed or not allowed. So since it's not a site development plan application, why are we putting that on there?
Some of them may involve a site development plan application in a commercial area.
Correct, but our review of that isn't going to, we're not reviewing whether their use is allowable or not, because that's not, has very little to do with the historic preservation. We're strictly material building elements. So I would rather free up that line and give more line work for your scope of work. Your information as to what they're doing is much more important to me than what their current use or proposed use is going to be. And the same thing for cost, because we're not charging based off of cost, correct?
Correct.
So then there's not a reason to have a project cost. Year the building was built's great. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
From an applicant standpoint, yeah, the lack of the email is probably the bigger element. Phone versus cell, I would just have one line for the phone. They're not gonna, we always give an office number, but people aren't gonna call that. They're gonna call the cell, because 9 times out of 10, you're gonna go to an automated voicemail if you go to the office number.
Okay, so remove current use, proposed use, project cost, cell, and just leave phone number, add email. So far I have as the
Yep.
changes.
There's also a typo in
I
the
s- yeah, I
bold
think I saw
paragraph.
it.
Fees
Yeah,
or ease.
yeah. It's like, oh, is that an acronym for something?
Yes,
Yeah, that's one thing.
you're gonna double your
I
permit
always need
ease.
somebody to read the document after me. It's just,
The problem with all caps is the fact that word check, spell check does not help you. They're not your friend. If you want to know if it's spelled correctly, put it all into lowercase, check it,
Then change it.
and then convert it.
yeah. Do you like it in the all caps? Or do you think I should not make it all caps?
It's
and
bolded.
only-
I wouldn't do all caps.
Yeah, if it's bolded, I wouldn't make it all
Unless
caps.
there's a legal requirement.
It's harder to read,
Okay.
We're gonna ignore it for the most part anyway, so.
yeah, for this
As an
part.
applicant, yeah, we ignore those
But we want to make
disclaimers.
sure it's there, because if they
Yeah.
don't give us something,
that's
then we
fine.
can refer
Right,
to
it's
that.
just hard on my eyes
Yeah.
to read.
It's actually easier to read it in regular text than it is all caps.
So I will take out any of the items that have all caps.
Yeah,
Well, your headers are fine, it's just
Okay.
from a sentence structure, reading, you know.
Just that one.
It's
Well, like some
hard
people,
on
they
the
might find it
eyes.
offensive because it's all caps, like when you're
I'm
texting, you're
screaming at
screaming.
them?
Like you're yelling.
But I'm always
I'm
yelling.
actually
What are you
trying
talking
to
about?
scream at them.
So just put it to sentence structure.
Yeah, I think that, other than my big one, was the email.
And the submittal requirements you actually looked at a prior meeting, so I don't think that you need to spend too much time on that.
No,
But it is 5:45 right now, and I
Yeah.
know that you all like to have a
Have a little
15-minute
break.
break.
From a list standpoint on the new construction or additions, because anything that's gonna happen within the central business district, if people don't wanna build a 3-story building, they're going to be doing an addition to your historic building. Because there's just not enough driving economics to go to a 3-story building, which is why you've got one of the applications in that over off of Florida. Is because of the fact that they tried to do it as a new building, not attached, and economically, they can't afford to do a 3-story structure. And to be honest, that's another question for us from a design guideline standpoint. If we're in a historic district that has a lot of single-story and some multi-story, but very few, you know, how do we as a board feel about having everything, all new construction that comes into the district being a minimum 3-story building?
Unfortunately, that's what's in the code right now, but we have had these conversations internally, so.
Correct. And the problem is the changes go into these codes that aren't necessarily vetted with the community.
Right. I agree, and it's all.
I know that change went through without being vetted through the community because everybody was shocked by it when they saw it. It's just fact that it happens. I mean, you know, Abraham just noted that we passed some ordinance in May that affects things, and that hasn't been noted to the
Right.
community.
Yeah, we
so-
had seen all of those through EDAC, but there was never any indication that it actually went to vote, so.
I mean, it's
If
just one of those
Maybe when we do
things.
our weekly, we should add that to that. If there's anything that was a ordinance change that went through council, we should bring to HPB as an information item. So, just in the weekly, just check in on that. Okay, but I really want to make sure that you all have a long enough break. So if we have any further discussion on this, we could pick it back up in the regular meeting before we do the vote. So if you did want to peruse this a little bit longer, go ahead and do so. But I just want to make sure that we give everybody the break that they need.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody want to do anything before taking a break?
No, it's break time.
We'll close the workshop.